Is or was podcast dying again? And has it finally been saved again? I'm trying a new format here on my channel just because I want to try to have a place to throw a few rants. I do it on TikTok, but it feels like that's an audience for just being silly. And whereas YouTube feels a little more like longer form, slightly more thought out, slightly more edited, and also I can more easily pull in the computer. So we'll see if this goes somewhere. If this is a thing I want to do, let me know if you think that I should do it again. But anyways, here we go. So my friend John posted over on Mastodon this very clickbaity article, well, self-professed clickbait article that he found over on Bloomberg. And the quote he pulled in was, "We've seen YouTube really emerge as the platform that saved podcasting from itself," said Glenn Rubenstein, founder at Adopter Media podcast agency. YouTube forced the industry to go back to its old school roots. All the most successful podcasts right now have a strong YouTube presence. So what I see a lot in podcasting now, this year, especially 2024, the year of our Lord, is a lot of podcasts thinking they need YouTube or they want to have a YouTube presence in addition to their audio podcast. Many different reasons why. I would say that almost none of them have to do with the financial reasons that they think maybe it is. Because a lot of it is rooted in articles like this, where it's big industry, big companies, big media conglomerates who stepped into podcasting because they thought they could make a buck and then now got disappointed over the last little while when it wasn't making as much of a buck for them, but they found a way back in and they think that's through YouTube. So let's take a look at the article. Nothing against Ashley Carmen. I think she's a great reporter, doing lots of great work in terms of just bringing awareness and news about podcasting. This is not any sort of slam against her writing or her research or even Bloomberg in general. But I do think there's a bit of a narrative that kind of like podcasting is struggling if big industries, big companies, $1 million deals aren't happening, and it's doing well if there's $1 million deals happening and therefore big companies are making money off of podcasting. And I just think that's not really true or representative of podcasting as a whole. It's definitely part of it. There's definitely a niche of podcasting that's big business, big $1 million contracts, big deals, etc., big shows. But the majority of podcasters who continue to slowly grow over time are not in that anywhere near that space. It's the podcasting middle class, let's say, or I don't know, whatever. I'm not an economist, but some sort of like middle class, lower class, no class podcasts. So let's read. Last year's podcast headlines couldn't have been bleaker. After years of massive attention-grabbing deals, the industry was suffering through some major bumps. Layoffs, company closures, show cancellations, acrimonious lawsuits became weekly occurrences. The reasons for this struggles varied, ranging from advertiser budget cuts to short-sighted demand for profitability over growth to a substantial change in the way downloads from Apple Podcasts were counted. Let's talk about that one for a second, because Apple didn't change fundamentally that podcasts were listened to and then they weren't. It's not like listeners stopped listening. Apple Podcasts, at a basic level of understanding, changed it from automatically downloading a bunch of episodes and then whether people listened or not, you didn't know, to only downloading it when it's requested and adjusting sort of the preferences for how shows are downloaded. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's kind of like a very quick overview, obviously, of it. And then also updated their analytics, as often happens with analytics software for tracking downloads, even tracking web page views, things like that, all over the web. It's not an exact science, and the sooner you accept that, the happier your day is going to be and life in general. But basically, they also, from time to time, adjust the analytics so that things that were counted as a listen before, as a full download, as a full stream, as a full listen, are sometimes cut from what qualifies as a full download, a full listen. And so you cannot live and die as much as I sit and stare at my YouTube analytics and my transistor.fm analytics stats from time to time. You can't live and die by the stats because there is so many variables at play there that go far beyond whether people are actually listening or watching your show. But now she writes, those dark days appear to be ending as the industry begins to bounce back. Everywhere you look in the field, optimism, excitement even, is returning. I deal with one area of podcasting, and literally nothing has really changed in that area for my clients and the people that I work with. They haven't seen a stark drop-off in podcast sponsorships. They haven't seen a dramatic improvement in podcast sponsorships. Maybe it's the trickle-down economics of big business podcasts that'll slowly affect smaller business podcasts, but I'm not seeing it yet. Do I think we're going to get back to the crazy Wild West of buying market share? I hope not, said JD Crowley, Chief Digital Officer and President, Podcast and Streaming at Odyssey Inc. That's not a healthy market. I think we're in a healthy market now, but it doesn't mean a show that makes no sense will get capital somewhere. So it's a little bit like some of the software development world where you could pitch a startup to investors and just they would hand you cash for the silliest ideas just because it was just throw a bunch of cash and hopefully some amount of it makes money, turns a profit, becomes a big unicorn kind of startup. Similar thing happened in podcasting, I would say, but it was all prompted by big business thinking there's way more money in podcasting. So firing up and starting up, Spotify hired a whole bunch of people to work in their podcasting division. They bought a bunch of shows, bought networks, etc. And other companies followed suit. And suddenly there's this massive industry in podcasting that was based on the idea that we're going to all make a bunch of money when it hadn't been proven really, other than in a few niche shows. So after filing for bankruptcy last year, he said, Odyssey's podcast business is now profitable. It is worth noticing that the Interactive Advertising Bureau and PricewaterhouseCoopers revealed that despite all the turbulence in the industry, overall podcasting ad revenue actually increased by 5% in 2023. So that's good. I mean, across whatever shows they measured before, compared to those same shows or those same demographics now, there's a 5% increase. That's good news. It's also important to notice, as they say, a few of the largest podcasting companies did maintain double-digit growth in 2023, but losses from mid-tier companies curtailed the channel's growth overall. The only way it's successful in, especially corporate America's mind, is if it's growing. You can't just be running a successful podcast that loses some listeners, gains some listeners, but overall is making enough money to pay for a podcast host, for editing, for the production team, whatever the scale of the podcast is. That's not a successful podcast if it's not growing, which is kind of crazy when you think about it in a rational sense, but I get that that's just part of investor blah. And then to me, what is the funniest or most interesting part of this is the other optimistic sign is big deals are back on the table. In the past week, Office Ladies confirmed that their move from SiriusXM Holdings to Odyssey, also previously quoted CEO or whatever, and Dax Shepard left Spotify for Amazon's Wondery. And as they reported earlier this year, Alex Cooper of Call Her Daddy and the Kelsey brothers are shopping for 9-figure deals. Over at Spotify, Joe Rogan signed a massive new contract that broadened his show's distribution to once again include YouTube and Apple Podcasts. I'm all for these shows, the people, especially the people involved, getting their money, getting their bag from companies like Odyssey, Spotify, Amazon, etc. But this to me is no different than you and I switching from one internet provider to the other because they give you a better deal for 12 months. And then you're going to switch back again in 12 months. The money is still the same thing that's floating around. Nobody's actually making any more. For every person that leaves your one internet provider and switches to the other one, there's someone going the other way because of the deal. And I think that's where this feels like the same kind of idea to me. The pieces are all moving around on the board, but there isn't actually new stuff being added. It's just the same big shows signing a new contract for exclusivity for 30 days for their podcast episodes. And everyone who listens and subscribes to that show then has to go find and figure out how to listen to the show again now because they're moving. But it doesn't really help the industry as a whole. And then this, of course, is the comment, the pull quote that John pulled out that got me to do this in the first place. But we've seen YouTube really emerge, the platform that saved podcasting from itself. Thank you, YouTube. Glenn Rubenstein, founder at Adopter Media, podcast ad agency that presumably only makes money if they can sell ads on podcasts. It has no relative value to podcasts themselves. A podcast could be successful without an ad agency and selling ads, but by definition for Glenn Rubenstein anyways, it's only successful if his ad agency is making money. YouTube forced the industry to go back to its old school roots. All the most successful podcasts right now have a strong YouTube presence, which of course is garbage because if you look at any sort of podcast charts, there's tons of shows that are successful that do not have any sort of YouTube presence. Maybe they have like clips that they share. Maybe they do this whole, TikTok and Reels and whatever, but they don't necessarily have a strong YouTube presence. And then this lovely quote from Ben Davis, partner at WME, adding that sponsorship of video studios and other social media assets is still developing. Right now, a video view is not worth as much as an audio download, but it's an equally rich experience. This kind of breaks my brain because podcasting, we all came from TV and movies, which is a video. We know how this works. This is not a new format. YouTube is not a new thing. YouTube itself is not a new thing in any stretch of the imagination, but even selling advertising with video is not a new thing. Sorry, Ben. And this summary of it. Still, it remains slightly unclear how much of an appetite the biggest podcast players will have post-correction to invest in the space and bet on an entirely unproven programming. Some greenlighting is still happening. Some gaslighting is still happening. Of course, though many of the newest programs rely on celebrity or established talent, and most opt for weekly episodes over seasonal or limited runs. The question of reinvestment also has implications for the producers, editors, hey, that's me, and other employees who are laid off during the correction. Will they still be able to find new work? So again, the vast majority of podcasting continued on daily, did not miss a beat, more or less. Despite the doom and gloom that happened last year and the saving now by YouTube that's been going on apparently, most podcasters are just trucking along, doing their thing, not really worried about whether Spotify is going to come along and offer them a bucket of money and hire them and then fire them 6 months later when they don't make as much money for their investors as they had hoped. So my advice in all of this, keep doing what you're doing. If your podcast, you're having fun, and it's working, great. Most of us aren't going to see 6-figure or even 5-figure or even 4-figure deals from anybody for our podcasts. And that's fine. Grow your audience in the way that makes sense for you, stays true to what you're doing and what you enjoy doing with your podcast. If you need to add a video version of it, or you feel like you want to add a video version, some podcasters just love seeing their face on YouTube. It's kind of like putting your face on TV back in the day. That's fine. Do that. Have fun with it. But know that the amount of work and effort and time required and just bits that you have to transfer to make a video version work on YouTube costs a lot. It costs you a lot of time, effort, attention to things that could otherwise be spent on improving your audio podcast. I still maintain in 2024, you can have a really successful audio-only podcast. You don't need to worry about how to figure out how to sell ads on your video. Yes, sharing clips on social media. Yes, having all of that as a way to grow your audience. Very important. So using a tool like Riverside, so you have a video version of it that you can use to make clips from. Great. That's awesome. Use that to draw people into the show. And this whole conversation is separate from the idea of putting your podcast in audio form or even just like with a placeholder, some sort of form on YouTube so that people can subscribe using YouTube. That's a whole nother conversation to be had, of course, but make it available on every platform for sure, as much as possible, as much as it doesn't break your back, which is where folks like Transistor come in, because people still in 2024 don't get that you host your podcast with transistor.fm or other less good podcast hosts. They take care of distributing it everywhere for you. You don't have to worry about having a connection to the 30,000 different podcast listing sites, services, etc. You can use transistor.fm, host your podcast there, and it'll get shared and automatically sent out to Apple Podcasts, to Spotify, to Amazon, to etc., etc. All right, let me know if you have any thoughts about what I had thoughts about. I'd love to know in the comments below. I don't think this is going to be a podcast thing. I'm just going to try this as a YouTube thing for now, see if it's worth all the editing and time, and if it's just fun to get to rant in video form. Thanks for watching this long. If you did, I'd love to know what you think and any questions you have about, or feedback or comments about what I said in the comments below, or hit me up on Twitter, iChris on Twitter, or all the other ones, wherever you can find me. Thanks for watching. Bye.